He thought she was just a counter attendant. Why would one of the richest men in Manhattan risk his entire fortune and social prestige just to humiliate an employee? What this millionaire failed to realize was that true power was disguised in a simple uniform. Discover the identity of the woman behind the counter and witness the silent revenge that changed his life forever. The afternoon light in Manhattan gave Fifth Avenue an expensive golden glow. But on that busy corner in Soho, the atmosphere felt cold and exclusive. The address was Chic and Company, a name that wasn't just about high fashion. It was a private club for the world's elite. The boutique had floor-to-ceiling glass windows showing off slim mannequins and understated jewelry. It was a statement of financial power. This was the stage where Wall Street arrogance was about to collide with much older and more powerful force. Elara Vance was in position. No, she wasn't Elara Vance there. In that store, she was just Amy, a temporary sales clerk working a 12-hour shift. Her uniform, a simple, elegant black crepe dress and leather flats that didn't reveal their price tag, was intentionally invisible. But if you looked closely, you'd notice that her posture wasn't one of exhaustion or submission. It was calculated patience, like someone watching a chess game from a master's position. The white gold bracelet, engraved with the logo of a Swiss charity foundation, was strategically hidden under her blazer cuff, a seven-figure secret she wore as a reminder. She was there for her annual immersion, a corporate ritual she, the actual global CEO of the chain, used to stay humble and, more importantly, to identify exactly how money and power corrupted people. At that very moment, the boutique's air was cut by the loud, irritated voice of Mark Donovan. Mark hadn't built his fortune. He'd inherited it, and his personality was a toxic mix of impatience and the unwavering belief that every minute of his life was worth more than anyone else's. Mark was a venture capital shark from Greenwich, Connecticut, with an office overlooking the Midtown Manhattan skyline, and he was used to the world bowing down to him. Mark was dragging his girlfriend Tatiana behind him. She was a digital influencer who measured her worth by the level of her public dissatisfaction. Tatiana was in theatrical tears over a tiny coffee stain on an extremely limited edition cashmere pashmina that cost the equivalent of Amy's rent for 3 months. Amy, or Elara, stepped forward, her expression calm. Her luxury retail training and international negotiation experience ensured her voice was smooth and firmly professional. "Good afternoon, Miss Tatiana. I'm deeply sorry. This is an extremely delicate item. I can process a complete and immediate exchange for you, or arrange for specialized cleaning at no cost." Mark ignored her completely, as if she were a piece of furniture that had spoken. He gestured angrily at the stain. No. I don't need your diagnosis. Sweetheart, just call someone who understands the value of things. Where's the manager? I don't have time to explain this level of problem to a shop girl. The words "shop girl" came out of his mouth loaded with unnecessary, calculated cruelty, designed to humiliate. The boutique, already busy with wealthy shoppers, went silent. Everyone's focus shifted to the drama. Amy didn't flinch. "Sir, I'm fully qualified to resolve any service quality issue in our store. The manager is in an inventory meeting. I can help you." Amy maintained her posture, but in her eyes, a cold, almost dangerous spark had just ignited. Mark laughed, a dry, mocking sound that echoed. He stepped closer, invading Amy's personal space, forcing her to look up at him. His eyes scanned Amy, from her simple uniform to her shoes, devaluing her with every millisecond. "Look here, Amy," he pronounced the name with contempt. "People like you don't understand what this scarf means. You don't understand the price, much less the rarity. Your job is to wrap the box, not offer financial advice. You don't have the moral authority or the financial one to handle a problem of my magnitude. Your weekly income barely pays for this item's gift wrapping. Now, stop wasting my time and go clean the display windows where you belong. We don't want your cheap soap smell contaminating our cashmere." The insult was brutal and public. Tatiana laughed nervously. The other customers looked at the floor, uncomfortable, but no one dared to intervene. Amy felt the sting of humiliation, but her mind was somewhere else. She was thinking about the annual shareholders meeting in Zurich happening next week, and the network of over 450 stores spread across Europe Asia and the Americas that depended on her decisions. She thought about the 40,000 employees she employed, people like Amy, who deserved respect. She took the scarf from Tatiana's hands, not allowing her gaze to meet Mark's again. Understood, Mr. Donovan. I'll call the manager as soon as he's available. Please wait in the VIP area. Her voice, despite the personal attack, remained perfectly controlled. Mark, satisfied with his display of power, smiled triumphantly. Good. Finally, someone gets it. He walked away, unaware that he'd just signed a decree of his own downfall. Amy quietly retreated to back of the store. The steel security door closed behind her, separating her from the store's illusory luxury. She didn't go to the stockroom. She entered a small camouflaged office, accessible only by fingerprint. There, the disguise ended. She removed her blazer, revealing the embroidered logo of the global fashion group discreetly sewn into the inner fabric. She picked up her encrypted smartphone, a device worth more than Mark's car, and dialed a number only she knew. Her voice, now without the forced smoothness, was pure command and executive determination. Marcus, it's me. Cancel all my appointments for next week and tell Zurich I'll be working remotely. And initiate a deep and complete investigation into a client named Mark Donovan. I want everything. Finances, ethics, and weak points. He needs a lesson he won't forget. And make sure he doesn't know he's being watched. The game has just begun. Elara's cold anger was frightening. She wasn't just planning revenge. She was planning a character reformation. Mark Donovan would be the first, and the lesson he would learn would be the new chapter in the legend of Elara Vance. While Elara Vance took off from a private airport in New York State, heading to her penthouse in Miami Beach, Mark Donovan was enjoying, or trying to enjoy, the comfort of his wealth. He was back at his venture capital office in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place where the marble was the only thing colder than the decisions made there. He'd already forgotten about the sales clerk in Soho. To Mark, Amy was just a bug he'd crushed, an insignificant footnote in his day. However, Mark's universe, rigidly controlled by his arrogance, began to crack in ways that were almost invisible but deeply disturbing. The first sign came from Boston. Mark was in aggressive negotiations to acquire a family-owned tech startup in the Seaport neighborhood, a profitable deal he planned to break apart for a quick profit. Suddenly, the founder, a woman Mark had ridiculed for her small-town mentality, called to cancel the deal. Sorry, Mark, she said, her voice strangely calm. We got a new investor. It's not a big corporation, but they gave us a massive investment and guaranteed me full control. They said they value ethics and family history over quick profit. Mark was furious. Ethics? History? I offered double. Who is this investor? What's the fund's name? His team of analysts searched the market, but the money came from a complex web of offshore investment funds registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands, entities that were impossible to trace immediately. Mark had the power of money, but he felt like he was fighting financial ghosts. The second sign came in the form of a subtle social humiliation. Mark was a regular customer at the famous Oak Room in the Plaza Hotel, where he always sat at the same table near the window. That evening, his maitre d', who always treated him with servile deference, informed him with cold formality, "We're sorry, Mr. Donovan. Your preferred table is reserved for a global VIP client." Mark was relocated to a table near the kitchen, where the noise and constant activity dismantled his aura of power. He watched the privileged table remain empty all night. He suspected a rival, but the feeling was more personal. While paranoia gnawed at Mark, Elara was operating in silence. In her luxurious Miami apartment, with the Atlantic Ocean as a backdrop, she supervised Operation Justice. Her assistant, Marcus, a former NSA analyst who now managed her personal empire, provided the details. Mark Donovan's profile is complete, Elara, Marcus reported, projecting a complex infographic on the glass wall. He brags about being a self-made man, but 80% of his initial wealth came from his grandfather's investment fund. He lives with the mentality that money is a license for cruelty. We discovered that his weakest point is a luxury yacht loan contract in Palm Beach that's about to mature. It's a liability he doesn't want anyone to find out about. Elara smiled, a small, sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't want to take down his company. Not yet. I want him to feel what it's like to lose control and dignity. The yacht is his vanity. Start discreetly buying up that loan debt through our European funds. Don't blackmail him. Just let him feel the financial pressure breathing down his neck. I want the smell of desperation he attributed to me to become his." The contrast between the two lives was shocking. Mark, the New York millionaire, was trapped in a web of his own anxiety, spending fortunes on private security and lawyers to find out who was sabotaging him. He suspected corporate rivals and even his own team. He yelled at Tatiana over trivial things, and the arrogance that defined him was being replaced by a raw, unfamiliar fear. He started drinking too much at his private bar, looking out at the city view, feeling small for the first time. Meanwhile, in Miami, Elara, the real global billionaire, lived with the simplicity Mark had ridiculed. She spent mornings in complex strategy meetings, but in the afternoons, she wore simple workout clothes and took long walks on the beach, enjoying modest meals. She understood true power. It wasn't the money you display, but the money you use discreetly to control the environment. Elara's Operation Justice wasn't about street revenge. It was about strategic manipulation of Mark's environment. She was using the infrastructure of her global empire, the same merger and acquisition lawyers Mark idolized, and the same social contact he sought, to slowly suffocate him in a way he couldn't prove. Mark's stress peaked when, trying to close a crucial deal with a major investor in Los Angeles, he was suddenly cut off in the middle of his presentation. The investor, known for her integrity, simply said, "Mark, there are certain people in my circle who advise me that you're an ethical risk. I can't do business with someone whose track record with employees isn't spotless." Mark tried to argue, but the investor ended the call coldly. Mark, now desperate, remembered the clerk in Soho, the one he'd insulted about the cheap soap smell. The memory, once insignificant, now haunted him. He picked up his phone and called the manager of the Chic & Company store in New York, offering a $10,000 bribe just to get the full name and address of the employee, Amy. He didn't know why, but he felt that the turning point in his life had been at that marble counter. The manager, who'd worked for Elara for 15 years, politely refused, following the CEO's encrypted instructions. Mark was lost and afraid. He was a predator, but now he felt like prey, surrounded by invisible enemies who seemed to know exactly where his weak points were. Elara's invisible game was working perfectly, setting the stage for the public humiliation that was coming. Mark Donovan's life had turned into a series of subtle rejections. His attempts to discover his saboteur had failed, and the pressure on his Palm Beach yacht loan was becoming unbearable. The debt had been bought by an impersonal and relentless creditor. Mark was isolated. Even his girlfriend Tatiana was avoiding him, claiming image problems. In his desperation, he received what seemed like a miracle, a lifeline, an invitation to a meeting in Chicago with the Phoenix Global Investment Consortium. This consortium, obscure but incredibly wealthy, was willing to consider a massive investment to stabilize Mark's firm and inject capital into his future acquisitions. Mark saw this as his only chance to prove he was still an elite player, silence the bankruptcy rumors, and crucially, restore his ego. He was blind with need. The meeting was scheduled at One World Trade Center, Chicago, in the top-floor conference room with panoramic views over Lake Michigan. Mark flew from New York to Chicago, rehearsing his business pitch, feeling the adrenaline and renewed hope. He was convinced that by presenting his aggressive vision, he'd force his anonymous investors to recognize his worth. On the day of the meeting, the conference room was cold and silent, dominated by a long polished ebony table and minimalist leather chairs. Seated, there were only two men, the legal counsel and the financial director of the Phoenix Consortium. Mark began his presentation with renewed arrogance, talking about how he would clean up the market of ethical startups and how money was the only language that mattered. He didn't even notice that the side door of the room was slightly ajar. In the middle of his speech, the door opened slowly. All eyes turned. A woman entered who needed no introduction. She wore an impeccably tailored white cashmere suit that looked like it cost as much as Mark's yacht. She radiated silent power, the exact opposite of the shop girl Mark had humiliated. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and her face showed no emotion, only calm, unquestionable authority. She walked slowly to the head of the table, and the two directors, who had remained seated for Mark, stood up instantly in silent respect. Mark froze. His brain, trained to associate luxury with names and status, took a few seconds to make the impossible connection. He recognized her, not by the expensive suit, but by the cold eyes and regal posture he dismissed as employee insolence at the counter in New York. He choked on his words. "You, what are you doing here?" "Amy, the clerk." The woman sat at the head of the table, folding her hands on the ebony surface. Her gaze was a sentence. "My name isn't Amy, Mr. Donovan. It's Elara Vance," she said, her voice as calm as an iceberg. She paused deliberately, savoring the terror growing in Mark's eyes. "And to answer your question, I'm here because I own this company. I'm the president and CEO of Global Fashion Group, which happens to be the parent company of the Phoenix Consortium you were hoping to beg for funds. And yes, I also own the Chic & Company store in Manhattan." The revelation was an electric shock. Mark staggered, the pages of his presentation sliding from his sweaty hands to the floor. He'd insulted, humiliated, and tried to bribe the owner of a multinational retail and investment empire, a woman whose wealth and influence exceeded that of his entire family. It all clicked. The sabotage of his deals, the cancellation of his table at the Oak Room, the yacht loan. Everything was part of a personal, surgical revenge orchestrated by the one he dismissed as having a cheap soap smell. Mark, the Manhattan predator, was now cornered prey in Chicago. Panic hit him with physical force. "No, it can't be," he whispered, his arrogance completely replaced by terrified pleading. This is an overreaction. Because of the stained scarf." Elara didn't allow his pleading to save him. She raised her hand, and the legal counsel placed a leather folder in front of Mark. The scarf was just the last straw. "Mr. Donovan, over the past few weeks, my team uncovered a pattern of market manipulation and tax evasion in your firm that violates all our ethical guidelines. And as the owner of your Palm Beach yacht debt, I feel obligated to inform you that the loan maturity will be accelerated to the end of this week." Mark felt the air leave his lungs. The yacht was a symbol of his status, but the forced liquidation of the debt meant an investigation that would expose his financial fragility. Elara stood up, ending the debate. She looked at him with final coldness. "The price you put on my position was contempt. The price I put on your character is ethical bankruptcy. You won't be a partner, Mr. Donovan, and the world will know exactly why. Consider this your final lesson. The cloak of humility can hide absolute authority." Mark Donovan, the millionaire who judged everyone by appearances, was on his knees before the clerk he'd humiliated, and the shock of the revelation was just the beginning of his downfall. Mark Donovan's downfall went viral. Elara Vance's power didn't just lie in her net worth, but in her ability to control global narratives. Less than 24 hours after the confrontation in Chicago, the story leaked, not through some gossip tabloid, but through business and ethics news outlets, making the scandal immediately professional and humiliating. The headline started in the influential Financial Times and was quickly picked up by the Wall Street Journal. "A Millionaire's Fall: How Arrogance Cost Mark Donovan a $500 million Deal." The article detailed the meeting at the Phoenix Consortium, Elara Vance's demand for moral accountability, and her refusal of the partnership. The most destructive point, however, was in the footnote, the story about the store clerk in Soho that Mark had ridiculed for her background and cheap soap smell. The humiliation was instant and widespread. Mark, the Manhattan predator, found himself in a state of immediate social exile. He was back at his New York penthouse, hunched in his own living room, which used to feel like a sanctuary of power and now felt like a glass cage. His phone rang constantly, but only with calls from worried lawyers and business partners pulling out. His arrogance was being called to account. The first blow came from Tatiana, his girlfriend. She confronted him in the living room, screaming not about his financial failure, but about the social embarrassment. "Your liability, Mark. Do you have any idea who Elara Vance is? Half of my brand partnerships are with subsidiaries of Global Fashion Group. I'm canceling everything. You didn't humiliate a shop girl. You humiliated the woman who dictates trends at Paris Fashion Week. My agent said I'm now toxic by association. Tatiana grabbed her bags, already packed, and left the penthouse, taking with her not just her belongings, but also the last trace of Mark's social validation. Mark tried to go to his exclusive social club on Fifth Avenue. The receptionist, a man he'd looked down on countless times, stopped him with professional coldness that was the signature of Elara's lesson. "We're sorry, Mr. Donovan. Your privileges have been suspended. According to Clause 3.2, we don't do business with associates who demonstrate flagrant ethical failures. We suggest you look for a club that's less exclusive." The embarrassment hit him like a tidal wave. He realized Elara didn't need lawsuits to punish him. She simply allowed the world to see who he really was. And the very system he worshipped, money and status, rejected him. The final financial blow came quietly, but with the weight of millions. Elara's legal counsel, Marcus, sent a formal notification that the Palm Beach yacht debt would be executed in 72 hours. Mark needed to liquidate assets quickly, and panic forced him to sell his most valuable minority stake at a 40% loss, just to cover the debt and avoid the public seizure of his status symbol. Sitting in his living room, looking at the headlines on his tablet, Mark replayed the moment at the marble counter in Soho. He remembered the silent dignity of Amy and the contempt he'd poured on her. He finally understood the truth. His behavior was that of a man poor in spirit, while the woman dressed in a clerk's uniform possessed wealth and power he would never have. The humiliation wasn't the price of a scarf. It was the price of his soul. He could no longer judge people by appearances, because the appearance he'd ridiculed hid the queen of global industry, and the appearance of his own expensive suit hid a deeply flawed character. Mark realized he needed a radical change. But what he would do next, in his state of social and professional ruin, would be the real test of whether Elara's lesson had actually worked. The months following Mark Donovan's public exposure were defined by an oppressive silence. He'd become a hermit in his own penthouse, watching his firm decline and his social circle disappear. The life he'd valued, filled with reserved tables, red carpets, and servile reverence, had evaporated. The smell of disinfectant and the isolation of his expensive apartment replaced the smell of cashmere and false flattery. The shock of the Chicago revelation had been the surgery. The recovery was painful and slow. Mark spent hours not trying to salvage his business, but rereading the articles that condemned him. Elara Vance's phrase haunted his every thought. "You didn't humiliate a shop girl. You humiliated the foundation of an empire." He finally understood. His crime wasn't financial. It was a crime of character. The real change began when Mark was forced to do something he'd never done in his adult life: clean up his own mess. With Tatiana gone and most of his household staff laid off due to financial problems, he was alone. Mark, the millionaire who considered cleaning beneath his dignity, was washing dishes in his penthouse sink. In that moment of forced humility, he remembered the cook he'd fired without just cause, the housekeeper he never even looked in the eye. He realized he'd built his world on contempt for those who did the invisible work, the work he was now forced to do. Elara's lesson was that you can't judge someone's power by the clothes they wear, or someone's value by the dirt they clean. Mark decided the only way to prove Elara's lesson had been absorbed was through public but quiet reparation. He knew he couldn't simply call or write to Elara. That would just be another arrogant attempt to buy forgiveness. He needed an act that was visible but selfless. He identified Elara's favorite charity network, a discreet foundation based in San Francisco that funded microcredit programs for women starting small retail businesses. It was a cause that resonated with Elara's own background and life mission, giving power to those who are underestimated. Mark sold the rest of his most valuable stocks and liquidated most of his modern art. Instead of injecting the money into his collapsing company, he made a substantial, anonymous donation to the foundation, not to clear his name, but to prove to himself that he now valued the little people he'd ridiculed. The donation amount was a personal price, representing the value of his remaining share in the yacht he'd lost. Mark knew that if Elara traced the origin of the donation, which he was sure she would, she'd understand that the amount represented the loss of his greatest vanity. Beyond the donation, Mark took an even more embarrassing but crucial step for his new mindset. He returned to the Chic and Company store in Soho, but not as an arrogant customer. Dressed in simple clothes, almost unrecognizable, he stopped the store manager, the same man who'd refused a $10,000 bribe. The manager looked at the defeated Mark, now without the shine of power, and hesitated. Mark spoke with new humility. "I didn't come here to apologize. I didn't come here as Mark Donovan, the millionaire. I came here to tell you, and if possible, telling me that I understood the lesson." He then did something that left the manager in shock. Mark, the tycoon who never touched anything that wasn't leather or marble, asked to borrow a broom and, with his own hands, spent 20 minutes cleaning up the accumulated trash in front of the store. The trash he used to ignore and that he felt symbolized the moral garbage of his old life. Mark cleaned the floor in front of the window display that had exposed him, feeling the weight of embarrassment, but also a strange freedom. He wasn't doing this for Elara, but for himself. The store manager watched, stunned. Mark returned the broom. "Tell Amy that the price of the lesson has been paid, and that the real value of life isn't in the balance sheet, but in basic decency." He walked away, leaving the manager behind. The act of humility, though private, was the first public and concrete proof that the millionaire who judged people by appearances was, in fact, transforming. Thousands of miles away from Soho, in her office overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Los Angeles, Elara Vance was reviewing the weekly reports Marcus, her assistant, had prepared. Her life, unlike Mark's, hadn't changed at all. She continued managing her global empire, but now with the added satisfaction of a successful lesson. Marcus slid an unusual financial report across the desk. Elara, the San Francisco Microcredit Foundation, received a substantial anonymous donation last week. It's the largest contribution they've ever had. Our teams trace the origin. The money came from the liquidation of an investment fund that was the main collateral for a certain luxury yacht in Palm Beach. Elara looked at the donation amount, her expression unchanged. She knew exactly who it was from. The amount represented the last remnant of Mark Donovan's vanity. She didn't need to ask, but Marcus continued, hesitating slightly. "There's more. The manager of the Chic and Company store in Manhattan sent us this." He recorded it discreetly. Marcus turned on a tablet, and the video showed Mark Donovan, unrecognizable in simple clothes, cleaning the sidewalk and picking up trash in front of the display window where he'd humiliated Amy. The arrogant Mark in expensive suits had disappeared, replaced by a man who seemed strangely comfortable with manual labor and quiet humiliation. Elara watched the video in absolute silence. She saw the stiffness in Mark's shoulders, which showed embarrassment, but also determination. When the video ended, she finally spoke. Her tone wasn't one of triumph, but of deep reflection. He didn't make the donation to buy forgiveness. He did to buy back his own soul, Elara said. He understood the price. The price wasn't financial, but one of character. Marcus questioned, "What do we do now? His company is on the brink of collapse. Should we deliver the final blow?" Elara closed the financial report with a sharp click. No, the goal wasn't to destroy him financially. Marcus. The goal was to transform him morally. Money is renewable. Character isn't. The Mark Donovan who humiliated a clerk no longer exists. The lesson is complete. She instructed Marcus to make a final, surprising move. Tell our public relations team in New York to silence the Mark Donovan story. No new articles. No new leaks. Let him rebuild his life in the silence he ridiculed. Elara had decided to grant Mark the one thing money couldn't buy. The chance for a fresh start, away from the cycle of public humiliation. She used her vast power not to continue the punishment, but to end it. Years passed. Mark Donovan founded his new firm, the Second Chance Fund, focused on ethical investments and supporting small businesses. He never recovered his previous fortune, but he recovered something far more valuable: self-respect. He became known in business circles, not for his inherited wealth, but for his surprising humility and his commitment to social justice. He hired employees based on the strength of their character, not the sophistication of their resumes. The story of the Soho clerk became a corporate urban legend, a cautionary tale whispered in the hallways of Wall Street and in the penthouses of Miami. Mark never saw Elara Vance again, but he never forgot her. The lesson that power can disguise itself in the simplest of clothes had become the foundation of his new life. He'd learned that the greatest danger wasn't financial failure, but judging people by appearances, without knowing that true wealth and power reside in dignity and humility. Elara, the queen of global fashion, had accomplished her mission. She hadn't just shaped one man's future, but also left an indelible mark on the ethics of the corporate world he'd tried to dominate. And so, Mark Donovan learned the most expensive lesson of his life. He thought he was humiliating a store clerk, but in reality, he was attacking the very foundation of integrity. And the price was a collapse of his own empire. The queen of fashion didn't need a courtroom. She wielded humility as her weapon and truth as her judge. Mark lost his fortune, but gained character. Elara Vance's story reminds us of a crucial truth. Never judge someone's power by the outfit they wear. The person you overlook today might be the one shaping your future tomorrow. It's proof that dignity and decency will always be worth more than any bank balance. Transition to subscription call, keeping the tone urgent and rewarding. If you were stunned by the twist in this story and believe moral justice is the most powerful form of revenge, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next shocking story filled with revelations, drama, and unexpected turns. Drop a yes in the comments if you agree that the price of arrogance should be the lesson of humility. See you in the next story.